She looked at me that night with a softness I had never seen before, and then she whispered, "If you stay tonight, everything changes." I didn't know if she meant it as a warning or an invitation, only that my heart had already decided. I met her on a night that wasn't supposed to matter. Just another evening, another gathering I almost skipped. The kind of night you expect to forget the next morning. But then she walked into the room, and the air shifted in a way I can't fully explain. She wasn't the loudest presence, nor the most attention-seeking. In fact, she carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that made the noise around her seem unnecessary. Every gesture was unhurried, deliberate, like she wasn't trying to keep up with anyone else's rhythm. She had her own. I noticed details first. The subtle way she tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear when she laughed, the soft lines near her eyes that only made her smile feel more honest, the way her voice was lower than I expected, calm and steady, like it could smooth the edges off any rough thought. I was talking to someone else when she brushed past me, close enough that the faint trace of her perfume lingered, something floral, clean, nothing overdone. It was such a small thing, but I remember how it pulled me out of the conversation I was pretending to be interested in. Later, I found myself near her at the table. She was telling a story to a couple of people, something about a trip gone wrong, her words carrying humor, but also the kind of self-awareness most people don't show. When she laughed, it wasn't polite, it was warm, from the chest, the kind that makes you want to laugh even before you understand the joke. I said something small, something half-witted just to join the conversation, and she turned her head toward me. That was the first time our eyes met. There was no spark of recognition, no cinematic jolt. Just a pause. A moment where her gaze lingered an extra heartbeat longer than it needed to, steady and unflinching. And for reasons I couldn't explain, that pause stayed with me. At some point, her hand brushed mine when we reached for the same serving spoon. A fleeting touch, nothing that should have mattered. But the warmth of her skin surprised me. It was grounding, real, as though for a second I wasn't just existing in that room. I was present, fully aware of her beside me. I don't think she noticed, not in the way I did. She carried on easily, gracefully, as if the world moved at her pace alone. But I noticed. I noticed the way her presence seemed to settle the room, how people leaned a little closer when she spoke, how silence around her didn't feel heavy but safe. That night, I went home not remembering much about the conversations I had, the names I was introduced to, or the jokes that were told. I only remembered her voice, her steadiness, the trace of perfume I thought I could still smell on my sleeve. And though I told myself it was nothing, some part of me already knew this wasn't going to be the last time she stayed in my thoughts. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about her. Nothing about her ever felt rushed. Our familiarity grew in the small, unremarkable moments that life has a way of placing quietly in your path, as if testing whether you'll notice. We began to cross paths more often. Sometimes it was through mutual friends, sometimes by accident, sometimes in ways that made me wonder if the universe had a sly sense of humor. A late-night errand that ended with us walking out of the same cafe at the same time. A project that kept us in the same office hours past midnight, when the building was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Each time, it felt less like coincidence and more like inevitability. What struck me most wasn't just her presence, it was the way she treated mine. She listened when I spoke, really listened, as though my words carried weight. She didn't just nod and wait for her turn to speak. She tilted her head slightly, her brow softening, her eyes fixed in a way that made me feel as though I wasn't just passing through her evening, I mattered in it. One night, after most people had left, we sat together in the quiet corner of a nearly empty cafe. Her stories weren't polished, rehearsed things. They came out raw, thoughtful. She told me about the years when she had to carry more than her share of burdens, about mistakes that had left their marks, about how strength sometimes wasn't a choice but a necessity. Her voice was steady, but every so often there was a pause, a small hesitation before she shared something heavier. In those pauses, I could almost feel the weight she rarely allowed others to see. And maybe it was the contrast that struck me most. The woman who walked into every room with such effortless composure now revealing, piece by piece, the fragility beneath. I found myself drawn not only to her confidence, but to the quiet vulnerability she revealed when she thought no one was judging. It made me want to guard those pieces of her, the ones she let slip only when the night was late and the world felt safe enough to be honest. There were moments when the space between us seemed to thin without either of us acknowledging it. Sitting side by side, our knees nearly brushing beneath the table, I could feel the warmth of her so close it was distracting. Once, as she laughed at something I said, her hand reached across the table, fingers brushing against my wrist in a gesture that felt both casual and deliberate. The touch lingered longer than necessary, and in that second, the air seemed to shift again, subtle, charged, impossible to ignore. But it wasn't just touches. It was the way her eyes sometimes lingered on mine, searching, holding, as though she wanted to say something but wasn't ready. Those looks unsettled me, in the best way. They carried an unspoken question I didn't yet know how to answer. And still, when we parted each time, I told myself not to overthink it. She was older, wiser, probably just being kind. I tried to convince myself of that. But then I'd remember the brush of her fingers, the sound of her laugh softening into silence, the way her gaze stayed on me half a moment longer than it should have. It was then I began to realize something was building between us. Slowly, quietly, but undeniably. And for the first time, I caught myself wondering where it might lead, and if either of us was brave enough to follow it. At some point, it stopped feeling like coincidence. The glances, the silences, the way her laughter softened when it was just the two of us, it all began to carry a weight I couldn't ignore. And yet, the closer we drifted, the more aware we both became of the line between us. It showed first in the pauses. Moments when our hands nearly touched, only for her to pull hers back just a little too quickly, as though the air itself had warned her not to let it linger. Moments when she began to say something, then shake her head and change the subject, as if she had caught herself revealing too much. One evening, while we were finishing a long day of work, I noticed it most clearly. We sat across from each other in the dim light of the office, the rest of the world gone home hours ago. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it never was, but this time it carried something different. Something heavier. She looked at me, then away, her lips parting like she had something to confess. Instead, she said lightly, almost too casually, "You're too young to understand." I should have laughed it off, but I couldn't. The words struck deeper than she probably intended. Too young. A reminder of the one truth we both carried like a secret weight. The years between us. I asked softly, "Do you really think that?" Her eyes met mine again, and for a moment there was no confidence, no practiced composure. Only vulnerability. She hesitated before answering, her voice quieter than usual. "Sometimes yes. And that's what scares me." That silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick with the things neither of us dared say aloud. I wanted to tell her that age wasn't the measure she thought it was, that what I felt had nothing to do with numbers. But I couldn't. Not yet. The words caught in my throat, trapped between caution and desire. From then on, it was as though every interaction balanced on the edge of something fragile. A smile lingered too long. A glance felt too knowing. Even when we weren't speaking, there was a current running between us, pulling us closer and yet reminding us of the distance we couldn't cross. I noticed the way her laughter grew softer when it was directed at me, the way she looked away quickly if our eyes held for too long. And I noticed the hesitation in myself, too. The way my heart raced at the thought of reaching across that invisible line, and the way my mind pulled me back, reminding me of everything that could unravel if I did. It was a strange kind of ache, wanting something so clearly, yet knowing it wasn't mine to reach for. And though neither of us said it out loud, I think we both knew we were standing at the edge of something dangerous, something tender, something we could no longer pretend wasn't there. The night that changed everything didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, like all the moments that had led us here. A simple request. She needed help carrying a few things to her house after work. Nothing unusual, nothing that should have made my chest feel tighter than it should. Her place was warm, lived in, full of the kind of details that spoke of a life already rich with stories. Photographs in wooden frames, shelves lined with books whose pages were softened by years of reading, a faint scent of lavender in the air. It felt personal, and I couldn't ignore the shift inside me as I stepped across the threshold, realizing this was the first time I had been allowed into her world, not just her company. We finished what she had asked me to help with, but neither of us reached for the clock. Instead, she poured us each a drink and motioned for me to sit with her on the couch. It was late, but neither of us seemed in a hurry to part. She slipped off her shoes, curling her legs beneath her, her posture relaxing in a way I had never seen before. There was no polished composure here, no quiet control of a room, only a woman letting herself rest. And seeing her like that made her feel closer, more real, more vulnerable than she had ever seemed. We talked, but the conversation felt different from the ones before. The walls were thinner, the words softer. She spoke of regrets, chances she had let pass by, people she had trusted who didn't deserve it, moments where she had convinced herself she was stronger than she felt. I listened, not because I felt I had to, but because every word mattered to me. There was a stillness between us, the kind that isn't empty but full of meaning, of things we weren't ready to say, but couldn't quite hide anymore. At one point, my hand brushed hers on the armrest. I waited for her to pull away like before, but this time she didn't. Her fingers stayed still, resting close enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her skin. My chest tightened, my breath caught, but I didn't move. Neither of us did. Her gaze softened then, and when she looked at me, it wasn't with the guardedness I had grown used to. It was with something deeper, like she was weighing a decision, something that had been building between us for far too long. The room seemed smaller, quieter. Every sound outside felt distant, unimportant. It was just us, her steady breathing, the flicker of the lamp light against her face, the space between us shrinking not with movement, but with understanding. And though neither of us spoke the truth aloud, I felt it settle between us in that silence. Something had shifted. We had crossed an invisible line, and there would be no stepping back. The days after that night at her house felt different, though nothing between us had been spoken outright. Still, I carried the memory of her hand resting so close to mine, the look in her eyes that had felt almost like surrender. Something had changed, whether we admitted it or not. It was a week later when I found myself back in her living room. Another late night, another quiet moment that seemed to stretch longer than it should. She poured us each a glass of wine, and we sat together, not side by side this time, but close enough that the pull between us was unmistakable. Our words drifted in and out, small stories, confessions too personal for the daylight hours. But there was always the undercurrent, the thing neither of us dared name. Every pause between our sentences grew heavier, every silence loaded with possibility. At one point, I shifted closer without meaning to, and our shoulders brushed. The contact was slight, but she inhaled sharply, almost imperceptibly, as if even that simple touch unraveled her calm. My chest tightened at the sound. She turned her face toward me then, her eyes catching mine in the low light. There was something unsteady in her expression, a kind of hesitation I had never seen in her before. For once, she didn't look like the composed, unshakable woman everyone else saw. She looked like someone caught between desire and fear. Her fingers circled the rim of her glass slowly, buying herself time, and then she said, almost in a whisper, "You don't know how dangerous this is." The words sent a chill down my spine, not because they were a rejection, but because of the way she said them. Her voice trembled slightly, caught between warning and confession. I wanted to answer her, to tell her that I did know, that I understood the risks, the stares, the whispers, the weight of years between us. But the words that rose in my chest felt too fragile, too easily broken. Instead, I only leaned closer, not enough to cross the line, but enough to let her feel the choice lingering in the space between us. Her eyes flickered down to my lips for the briefest second before returning to mine, and the sight made my pulse race. She was wrestling with herself. I could see it in the way her hand hovered near mine on the couch cushion, fingers curling, relaxing, curling again. The room was utterly silent. The kind of silence where every breath feels magnified, where the faintest brush of movement could mean everything. Our shoulders stayed pressed together now, neither of us moving away. The line between us wasn't invisible anymore. It was tangible, humming, alive. And then she said it, not a confession, not a promise, but the closest thing to both. I notice you more than I should. The admission hung in the air like a fragile thread. My throat tightened, my chest ached, but I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it stay there between us, heavy and real. Because in that moment, we both knew. The line hadn't been crossed yet, but it was only a matter of time. The night it happened began like so many others. No grand plan, no dramatic setup, just the two of us, lingering longer than we should have after everyone else had gone. Her house again, the soft glow of a lamp instead of bright lights, a stillness outside that made the world feel far away. She sat beside me on the couch, legs folded under her, the same quiet composure she always carried, but I could feel it slipping. Her voice, usually steady, was softer. Her movements, usually deliberate, seemed slower, hesitant. I knew she was thinking. I knew she was deciding. I told myself not to hope, not to imagine. And yet, my heart beat faster with every silence between us. At one point, I turned to say something, I don't even remember what, but stopped when I saw her expression. She wasn't looking at me like she had before. There was no guardedness, no practiced ease. Just a seriousness, a weight that settled in the space between us. Her hand lifted slowly, almost uncertain, and then it rested against my cheek. The warmth of her palm startled me, not because I hadn't imagined it, but because it was real. Her thumb brushed the corner of my face, and I felt my breath falter. Her eyes held mine, searching, steady, and then she whispered, her voice so quiet it felt like it was meant only for me. If you stay tonight, everything changes. The words cut through me, not as a threat, but as a truth. Everything in her tone told me this wasn't casual. This was the line, the point of no return. Before I could answer, before I could even gather the weight of what she had given me, she leaned forward. Her lips met mine, not with urgency, not with certainty, but with hesitation. A soft, trembling kiss, more question than declaration. Her hand slid from my cheek to the side of my neck, her fingers gentle but insistent, holding me there as if she was afraid I would pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. The world narrowed to the warmth of her lips, the faint tremor in her breath, the impossible tenderness of the moment we had both been denying for too long. When she finally drew back, her forehead rested against mine. Her eyes stayed closed, her breath uneven. And though she didn't speak again, I could feel the weight of the question in her silence. Would I stay? I wanted to answer her with words, but nothing felt strong enough. So instead, I reached for her hand, threading my fingers gently through hers. I gave it the slightest squeeze, letting her know, without speaking, that I understood, that I wasn't afraid. And in that quiet, I realized something. It wasn't the kiss that changed everything. It was the choice we both knew was waiting after it, the choice to stop pretending and to let ourselves finally fall. We didn't rush into anything that night. After her words and that kiss, the air between us was fragile, too sacred to fill with anything but honesty. So we sat together, still holding hands, still leaning into the silence that seemed to say more than our voices could. Hours passed without us noticing. Sometimes we talked in whispers, sometimes we didn't talk at all. She told me pieces of her past she had never shared before, how she learned to carry herself with such strength, how loneliness had quietly followed her even when she looked unshakable on the outside. I told her things I hadn't said aloud to anyone, my fears of not being enough, of being judged, of wanting something I wasn't sure I deserved. And in those confessions, there was no judgment, only closeness. Eventually, she rested her head against my shoulder. I remember the weight of it, light yet grounding, her cheek warm through the thin fabric of my shirt. I remember how her breathing slowed, evening out, until I knew she had drifted into sleep. I sat there for a long time, not moving, afraid to disturb the peace that had finally settled between us. When morning came, light slipped softly through the curtains, painting the room in pale gold. She stirred beside me, blinking against the brightness. For a moment, she looked younger, almost girlish, before the awareness of everything returned to her eyes. I expected regret. I expected her to pull away, to wrap herself in distance and composure again. But she didn't. She only sat up slowly, brushing a hand through her hair, and then smiled at me, small, tired, but real. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice still husky from sleep. I nodded, and she disappeared into the kitchen. I sat there, listening to the quiet sounds of her moving about, the clink of cups, the steady hiss of the kettle. And I realized how natural it felt, how ordinary and extraordinary all at once. When she returned, she placed a steaming mug in front of me. Our fingers brushed again as I took it, and this time the touch wasn't hesitant. It was deliberate, gentle, a silent confirmation of what we had already chosen. We sat there in the morning light, sipping coffee in comfortable quiet, both of us aware that nothing about this would be simple. People would talk. Doubts would come. The years between us would not disappear. But as I looked at her, saw the way she smiled at me, soft, private, meant only for the space we now shared, I knew none of that mattered as much as this did. When it was time for me to leave, she walked me to the door. Just before I stepped out, she caught my hand, her grip firm, her eyes steady on mine. No words were needed. That touch said everything. We've begun something. We're not going back. As I walked away, I carried her with me, not just the memory of the kiss, not just her voice whispering, "If you stay tonight, everything changes." I carried the quiet truth that had settled into me. Last night, everything had changed. And for the first time in a long time, change felt like the only thing I wanted to hold on to.